You're listening to the Valley Current.
Wow, Bob, welcome in. You know, we had a really interesting event happen this morning with the Supreme Court ruling in the Republic of Sudan case. And I thought I've got to get you on the phone and do a special little podcast about this because it goes in the direction to me that suggests that maybe the Supreme Court wants to send a signal to China that sovereign immunity may not work if the federal government decides to change its statutes and call this COVID-19 bioterrorism.
Well, Jack, and I would just say I've looked at the opinion, and what the opinion deals with is the aspect of punitive damages. They already had dealt with compensatory damage. It's been a slow process from the old days when you could clearly not sue a foreign government in the United States.
Right.
And that was for good reason. And since then, that concept has been somewhat eroded so that you could sue a foreign country in the United States slowly but surely. And today, it went all the way, it went all the way saying you could sue for compensatory and punitive damages, and even for punitive damages if the event, which it did here, occurred prior to the Congress changing the law. It's retroactively applied to an event that occurred in 1998, as you know, in Kenya and Tanzania, where about 150 Americans were killed. So to answer your question, can this apply in the situation of the coronavirus with China? Theoretically, yes. As a practical matter, and let's just say whether it's individual or a class. Individual, one person suing China for loss of a loved one or something like that, getting past the question of liability, that is to say that you could prove that was the fault of China, they did something wrong, it wasn't simply an act of God. Getting past that, one person might be able to assert a claim, at least on the face of it, against China. As far as a class action, no way, no how, because it would be too big. And one thing I do remember from my days at Belli, with Mel Belli, and that is he always said, if a case is too big, it can never work. And
it scares most judges, right?
Well, it scares. It's just not a practical way to resolve an issue. For example, way after his time, 9/11. 9/11 killed 3,000 people.
Right.
9/11 could have found itself to the courts, yes, and it could have been an action that was viable. However, both Congress and the private bar realized that was not the way to go. And what happened was our then Attorney General Ashcroft got together with his opposite, Ted Kennedy, on the other side of the political spectrum, and they agreed to choose someone to mediate or resolve these claims.
Right.
And Feinberg. And Ken Feinberg did that with an open pocketbook from the government, no cap at all. And he was able to do it. Otherwise, the cases would have gone on forever. And the few did not go with Ken Feinberg did litigate, and that did go on for a long time. I think it's still going on, right. 20 years later.
Right, and Feinberg, I think, is still involved to some degree, right?
I think he has too much stuff on his plate right now, including a case that I have, or two possibly, with him.
Well, if you look at this situation, China announced today that they're going to open up their financial support for third world countries that have been hurt by coronavirus. So they're kind of opening up their purse strings very, very judiciously to say, well, we just want to be good world citizens. We're not saying that we did anything wrong, but these third world countries are obviously in poverty. We want to help. We want to do the right thing. I bet they're going to open up a couple of $1 trillion on this, Bob.
I do believe that, and they're being very smart and responsive to our administration, which is doing the opposite when Trump doesn't want to help the World Health Organization and does not have a role, does not believe in a role for America in a worldwide situation like this. China is smart. They're doing exactly what we should have been doing. It reminds me, Jack, of, oh my God, 40 or some odd years ago when in Egypt, they wanted to build a dam, the Aswan Dam. And they asked the United States was struggling. And then Russia, who is the power that China is today, Russia said, well, if the US doesn't do it, we will. And that gave them all the credit in the world. It didn't cost a dime. So it's kind of, outsmarting us. But here, China is actually putting up money. And yes, you're right. They'll put up more money. And they're going to be the dominant power because Trump is an anti-globalist.
Right, but let me give you a hypothetical, because this is what happened to me after I'd read this advance sheet. And I read this stuff when it comes off the presses, and if I think it's important, I send it to you because you're the master at this stuff. And I said, Bob, you got to look at this. And you said, hey, I'm too busy. I said, no, make some time to do it. I really appreciate that you made the time. And I said, I read this as, if I'm Trump, if I have anyone on his staff that knows the signaling of the Supreme Court, I say we have to get a bill together right away and stuff it down Congress's throat to say we want to retroactively change federal law and put a bioterrorism clause into that same statute and that same punitive damages and the same compensatory damages, and say, look, we're not saying it was bioterrorism. We're saying if it's proven to be bioterrorism, we're going to retroactively do this. China's got a huge amount of U.S. assets. It sets the table for the negotiation. It's a big negotiation. It might get him reelected, Bob. It might get him reelected. Donnie, are you listening to me? Donnie! Not that I want him reelected, but it's really a big idea.
Yeah, that would be a smart idea. And I will mention, because you and I did not mention this, that the vote was 8-0 in the United States Supreme Court, with Justice Kavanaugh abstaining because he was on the Court of Appeals.
At the time.
At the time. So he didn't, but they didn't need his vote. And it's a wonderful time to see the Supreme Court actually on any issue come together 8-0.
Right. It's rare. It's rare. And by the way, I'll tell you, they cited a patent case called HALO. HALO is a patent case dealing with punitive damages where the court said, look, if you're engaged in what's called willful blindness, which is you're hiding the fact that you know something, you're concealing facts, that too can give rise to the level of malice to justify punitive damages. So you have to read the tea leaves of what's going on here, because they're kind of saying, look, if federal law changes, we will let federal law change, even with these principles that most laws are meant to be prospective. They look to the future. This is a rare case where essentially you're changing the law after the conduct occurs, right?
Right, and it's a surprise party for those who committed that conduct because they didn't know the law was going to change, and how could they? And by the way, punitive damages is a very interesting concept, and it goes back to tort practice of many years ago. And the concept was, how do you deter this sort of bad behavior in the future? And that was to punish the alleged wrongdoer.
Right.
And the guideline in terms of allocating the amount, determining the amount of punishment was, at that time, at least historically, how much money would it hurt this, usually company, not country. Historically, it's a company. And you then had to look at the financials to find out how much would really hurt them. Half a year's income, a whole year's income, that sort of thing.
Right.
So in a case like this, it could be enormous. The one we were talking about, I believe it's $4+ billion.
Right.
That was the punitive damage component, and I think the compensatories were something like $6 billion.
Right.
And,
the exact numbers were $5.9 billion on compensatory and $4.3 on punitive for 10.2, entered by the district judge in a trial in which Sudan did not show up it was like a default judgment hearing where they had to prove up their case, because they still have to prove up their damages. They can't just say hocus pocus. So they must have come in with some experts and some numbers, right?
Right, they certainly had to, and that was a default judgment. But as I don't know whether it was in the Court of Appeals or at the Supreme Court level, they did, that is, Sudan did hire counsel.
Yeah, they hired counsel at the appellate court level and got the D.C. Circuit, which Kavanaugh was on at the time, to reverse on the punitive damages, but to affirm on the compensatory damages. So the 5.9, I don't know where they're going to collect it. I guess Sudan may have some bank accounts here or somewhere. I mean, they got to try to collect this money now, right?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I actually was involved many years ago in a case involving they call it South Sudan, when they split off. And at that time, we did see, having gone there and visited the scene, it was very difficult to collect money.
Right. It's a big challenge, but China, we know, has lots of assets here. China is like the biggest creditor to the United States.
Right. Yeah. China, if we ever got this far, China would have the assets. But again, just imagine the amount of money that would be necessary to compensate, both in terms of compensatory damages and punitive damages. The people they're going to be north of 100,000 deaths. They're already at 85,000.
Right.
So you just think about just the wrongful death aspect of this. I don't think there's a country that could afford to respond to that kind of a judgment. It's so enormous. So again, for that reason, I'm a little bit negative about this, because I can't imagine it happening.
Okay, but let's put our like creative suspend disbelief hats on for a second. And I want to go back to Belli, because you were a partner with Belli, and Belli was the king of torts, famous guy. You mentored under him. He was your mentor. You learned a lot from him. A lot of people learned a lot from him. He was a great lawyer. Of course, he ended up broke in bankruptcy. He lost his boat to a friend of mine who now owns the Pfeiffer. It's another story for another time. But when you look at what Belli would say about punitive damages, how did he look at punitive damages? Because I didn't think he was a big fan of punitive damages. I thought he was like, we prove the case. If we get $1 million, let's be happy. We're rich. Let's move on, right?
Right. I don't think he ever had a punitive damage verdict, and I don't think very many people did in those days. He would talk about punitive damages. He would say, hey, this is a great case for punitive damages. But then he might say to me or somebody like me, Bob, work it up, and then he'd go off somewhere. But it's part of the tort system. And it is that part that really puts pressure on a defendant and a huge kind of liability. For example, in tobacco, nobody collected punitive damages. Well, that's not true. In the big case, I'm thinking about this. In tobacco, in recent days, this is the last 4 years, we have had cases in Florida where we did get some punitive damages. And usually the courts have said that the amount of punitive damages, the quantity of punitive damages, has to bear a relationship to the compensatory damages, usually not more than 3 or maybe even 4 to 1.
Well, so constitutionally, it's limited to under 10, right? Isn't there a constitutional rule now that it can't be more than 10 to 1? There's a case on that.
I don't know if that's true. I have never seen it 10 to 1. I usually see it an equal amount.
Yeah.
If you get $5 million compensatory, you might get $5 million punitive.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much the standard. But we've been thinking about. So I was going to say, in some of our cases, recent one plaintiff versus one tobacco company in Florida in the federal court, we have been getting some punitive damage jury awards. They have gone up on appeal. And in the first couple ones, we have won. The Court of Appeals in Florida, for Florida, the circuit court has affirmed. So yes, there are possibilities. But then you've got a situation in tobacco where it has now been proven that there was willful behavior on the tobacco companies,
Yes.
that the presidents, if you remember, the presidents of the tobacco companies or CEOs went before Congress and to a man, they were called the seven dwarfs, to a man said, oh no, there's nicotine. Nicotine is not addictive. Well, it was addictive and it is addictive. And they later figured that out. So that kind of conduct led to punitive damages. And that's how we got some in Florida.
But if you take the city of New York, which has had the greatest number of deaths,
right,
I think, of any city worldwide. I mean, it's really devastated New York. And the city of New York goes to Congress. And Cuomo, who's on the air every night, bless his soul, very objective guy, trying to do the right thing. And I'm talking about, Andrew, the older brother, not Chris.
Yeah, the governor.
Yeah, the footnote to this story is I remember working with his father when his father taught in New York. It's a different story for a different time. And he was a bright guy. The governor was a bright guy. His son's a bright guy. Chris Cuomo, I guess, is more of like a news reporter. He had COVID and got over it.
He did, yes.
And so here's the point. The governor says to Congress, or says to whoever the New York senator is, I forget who it is right now, hey, why don't we get this?
Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer.
Exactly. Why don't we get some legislation going here? Why don't we get something that takes advantage of this case that was just decided today and try to get bioterrorism into the statute? I don't know if I'm going to prove it, but God damn it, I'm going to hire Robert Leaf and Leaf Cabraser to lead the pack because those guys are smart and they do class action cases. And I got the whole city here. And by the way, Ken Feinberg is a good mediator. He knows how to do this stuff. And Bob knows how to work with Ken. Am I missing something? What am I missing there?
I'll give you a good example what you may be missing, and that's this, that when we did tobacco, it's similar to this, the states came to us, just like you're talking about, and said, hey, Bob Leaf, hey, Leaf Cabraser, would you bring this case against the tobacco industry? And I want you to bring it, the state said, for all the money we had to spend to treat these people that were victims of tobacco in the hospitals and so forth. And we said, okay. And then they said, okay, how do you want to do it? And we said, we'll do it on a contingency if that's what you want. And they said, that's what we want. So they, to a state, one after another, said, okay, we'll sign a contract. We'll give you 25% of the recovery we get. So, okay, we handled the case and went on. And eventually the case is settled for $246 billion. So we went to the states, starting, for example, with Massachusetts and something, and we said, okay, here's your money, and where's our 25? Well, the Attorney General said, well, we never thought you would win.
Oh, come on.
Honestly,
get out.
We signed that it was good politically. It looked good in the newspapers, but we didn't think you would win. We're not going to pay you 25%. So we had to then sue the states, and we had to go back to the tobacco companies. And actually, in that litigation, the tobacco companies actually came up with $13 billion to pay the lawyers.
That's not 25%.
No, that was
25%.
not 25%. No, that was 5% or less. Yeah, but it was so. I was a star witness in our case against Massachusetts, and then our case in California, where Danny Weinstein, another very good mediator, mediated that. But I thought that was the funniest thing. So New York hires us and says, you sue China, and we sue China, and we get some huge amount of money, and then we come back and we say, okay, we signed a contract for 10%. Well, we never thought you would win that one.
Wait a minute. First of all, they give you the Medal of Honor for delivering the goods.
Yeah, right.
They give you the key to the city for delivering the goods. I don't know if you want to go to New York City to pick up the key or not. That's a different.
Right.
But they give you the key to the city, the Medal of Honor, and they say, Bob, you are brilliant. We lost so many of our citizens. We lost the tax base. We have poverty in the streets. We have money now. We can fix New York City. We can fix the train system. We can fix the streets. I mean, you will be made king for the day of that city, and you're
king for the day, and we could take that Medal of Honor they gave us, and we could go to the bank and ask, how much collateral is this worth? And you know what the bank is going to say? Well, we'll have to weigh that tin and see what it's worth. Maybe $1.50. We don't know.
No, I think they'd actually give you quite a reward. I think they'd give you and your firm quite a reward, because they'd say, we didn't even see, we have the best lawyers in New York reading this stuff. We got Chuck Schumer, he's a lawyer. We got Gillibrand, she's a lawyer. All these lawyers in New York, they didn't read the advance sheet the way you read it, and you put the dots together. You gave us the idea. You came up with the plan. I mean, think of the political football that they can have on this. Trump can't say no. He's got to say, this is brilliant. I got to have some power against the chairman in China. I got to have some power against him.
So then I'm going to say, okay, Mr. President, I want you to meet my partner, Jack Russo, whose idea it really was.
I appreciate
and you have to spend a little time talking to him, and he'll convince you. If you don't, or you might want to give him a job in the Attorney General's office in the Justice Department.
Well, Bob, let me tell you the story, because this is really a truthful story this morning. I got up at 4:30 a.m. this morning. I'm usually not up that early. I get up pretty early, but I was up at 4:30. I sit in my kitchen and I turn on the coffee maker at 4:30. Why did I get up? I had a dream last night that my mom, who's turning 90, was in distress in Florida involving COVID-19. So I called her up. She picked up the phone on the first ring. She said, I'm fine. Leave me alone. Why are you bothering me so early in the morning? I said, Ma, I just had a dream. It was so clear. She said, oh, in the middle of the call, my screen flashes. Supreme Court releases case against Sudan. It was like it happened like instantaneously. And I got the friggin' printer in the kitchen to work, which usually it doesn't work. I press the button, print. The 16 pages come out like in perfect shape. I'm going to sit down and read this. I said, holy shit, unanimous decision. Holy shit, billions of dollars. Of course, when I see billions of dollars, I think Bob Leaf, Cabraser, because you guys never talk to me unless there's at least like $1 billion on the table. I said, I got to call Bob up. So I sent you that. And I said, we got to get this on a podcast, because this is really hot news. I mean, this has really got to be published right away, because there's idea here that Schumer, Gillibrand, the Governor Cuomo, Donald Trump, even Mitch McConnell will say this is brilliant.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that, it was enough money to make it worthwhile. Back at Bellas, just to go back for a minute, for him, if a case was worth $5,000, that was the threshold. It had to be worth $5,000.
That's kind of funny,
$5,000. Now, at Leaf Cabraser, probably $50 million.
50 million.
Yeah, right. Billion.
Billion.
50 million, but that doesn't mean you're going to get 50 million. You could also lose that case. These cases can be lost. That's why you get 25%, because you could lose these cases. But so times have changed. So I'm glad you saw the zeros. There are a lot of zeros. But my concern is there are really too many zeros here. Zeros.
Let's pretend we got Feinberg on the phone. We can't do it right now, but let's pretend we got Ken on the phone, and we said, Ken, did you read this decision that unanimous Supreme Court, one judge abstaining, Kavanaugh abstaining, Opati versus Republic of Sudan? Did you read that this morning? He says, no. We're going to send you a copy. Read it. Do you see what we see? Feinberg's going to say, yeah, I see it loud and clear. How are you going to get this federal legislation through? The Chinese have a lot of lobbyists in D.C., They've got a lot of people that might push back on this, right? They might not. So, hey, Ken, what do you think? If the legislation changes and a class action is brought by Bob Leaf and Leaf Cabraser, you think there's something the Chinese would maybe sit down with you and talk about, at least for the city of New York? Now, he's a Bostonian, right? He's not in New York City.
Yes, he is. He's a Bostonian, yes.
Right. So maybe you got to get somebody in New York, too, that says, wait a minute, this case is so big, we need 3 mediators. We need someone who speaks Chinese.
Right.
We need someone who's going to get through the Chinese along with Ken, and maybe some third person, a recently retired federal judge. or recently retired Supreme Court judge, like Judge Kennedy, Justice Kennedy, recently retired,
Yes, yes.
who says, wait a minute, there's a lot to talk about here. We're trying to save the United States from a major depression. You know, $20 trillion would do a lot to save this nation from a major depression, right?
Right.
Quite an injection.
Well, let me say that one person I would talk to is the Robert Lee Professor of Chinese Law at Columbia University. That's Ben Liebman. I have endowed that particular chair, and it is in Chinese law.
Beautiful.
And it's a Chinese Law Institute, and he's well known. Ben is well known in China. Of course, speaks Chinese. But yeah. I mean, here's the deal. In any kind of case, I always say the first thing you have to do, what's the exit strategy?
Yes.
If you don't have an exit strategy, don't enter the case.
Right.
So in a case like you're talking about, the only exit strategy is a settlement, probably a political settlement.
Yes.
Something that, as you say, what Donald Trump and his people would like, and Mitch McConnell and so forth. And the only kind of political settlement is, it is part of the overall negotiation which is ongoing with China regarding the theft of whatever Trump is claiming today or tomorrow. So that would be the way to get out of it. You have to figure that out. But let's just see what happens. I'd like to see to what extent governmental entities or Congress or the executive do anything here. But I'm glad you're thinking. I'm glad you've got ideas, and I'm glad you know my phone number, because
I'm still alive and breathing, Bob, and I've got your direct email, and I know how to get it to you early. And you're an early bird too. You picked up the phone right away, so that was good. That was good.
Oh yeah, I'm an early bird. And I don't know if Melissa Ferrara, is she on the call? Or
no, she couldn't make it, but we'll get her on the call maybe on Friday.
Okay, because you know why, as an aside, I wanted to mention to you, I don't know if you know, but in April, we opened up our first European office. We opened up in Munich. And that kind of ties into the Global Justice Network. And our weakness there has been we haven't had an effective office in Germany. You have to have one in Germany.
Yes.
You have to have one in England as well.
Yes.
But in any event, now we actually have an office in Munich. She doesn't even know this. I've got to tell her that.
Which you started the idea for that at your firm 20 years ago. I remember you talking about it.
Yes, I did. And I could even go back further to say that I've spent a great deal of time in Munich when I was back at the Belli office, and we were litigating on behalf of the widows of German pilots flying the Starfighter F-104. And those planes were crashing all over Europe. So yes, I spent a lot of time suing and being involved in this litigation in Munich. So there we go. Symmetry, but back in Munich again.
Okay. So let me make a suggestion. I'm going to send you my marked up copy. I've got notes all over it. You'll get a kick out of the Supreme Court decision. I'll send you my marked up copy for you to look at how I'm thinking about this case and how broad it is. It's a really well-written Gorsuch decision. I thought he did a really good English, really good sentences, good paragraphs, really
smart guy. He's a smart guy.
Smart guy, very smart guy. He got all of those competing justices together on one page.
That is great. And whether he did it or Roberts, whatever it is, it's a rare day indeed. And it was a good day.
So well written, young justice who's really smart, showing his talent, and a unanimous court, not even a footnote, not even a suggestion that anyone disagrees. They're all like, we're on board. The signaling could not be louder. In my head, the signaling that's flashing could not be louder. In the face of this pandemic, they issued today, May 18, 2020, we're just maybe returning, maybe not. The Supreme Court's not returning apparently until maybe July or August, and maybe not even this year at all. They're just going to do these phone arguments, which so far look like they're working. I listen to them all the time. I'm kind of amazed at how Roberts controls these lawyers and controls his fellow justices very well.
Yes, he does. Yes, and when they sat in conference and they went around the room and it was 8-0, Roberts then could pick the youngest justice and say, you write this one.
Yeah, because Kavanaugh's really the youngest, but he's out because he was
out.
on the DC circuit. And he gave Gorsuch something that will be memorable for a long time. The first decision, totally unanimous. The guy must be walking on air right now, feeling great. And so we're now going to send this podcast to your partners at Leaf Razor and hope that they watch at least the first 5 minutes. I will attach the ruling, and I will attach that news report about how the Chinese are going to open up their purse strings to the third world countries, which is also a signal that they know the game is in play now. They know the game is in play and that they have to do the right thing. You know, if VW had done something smart, they probably could have headed off all that class action litigation had they been half savvy to some of the ways in which the Chinese are operating in the current crisis, in my opinion.
All right, send it. Okay, Jack.
You take care, Bob. You might see some other alerts from me, but I won't waste your time.
Keep doing it. Keep sending them.
Absolutely. I will do that. Right. Take care.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Give my regards to your lovely wife.
I certainly will.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.